Hi, folks. This is Dr. Kat Schreier, Water Citizen News and Water Citizen Media Foundation. Welcome once again to The Water Show. Every week we get the water community together live on air to talk about just a whole bunch of different interesting things that are going on in water, introducing you to some interesting people, and just different ways of thinking about water and society, keeping the conversation flowing. Hopefully you're watching this on watercitizen.com/The Water Show, and if not, please, go ahead over to watercitizen.com/The Water Show, and there's a place for you to leave your comments, as well as to subscribe to be in the know on H2O and get the latest updates on the upcoming shows that we have. We will be recording this as well as ultimately posting it up on iTunes and other platforms to live forever. But we're really glad to have you here today. Those of you who can join us live, and even if you can't, go ahead and keep your comments flowing down below. And let's get this conversation started. Today we have one of my favorite conversations, which is some of the innovations that are occurring in agricultural uses of water. Different ways of integrating innovation into agriculture. And I've got a couple of really spectacular innovators, entrepreneurial ventures that are working on ways to introduce new technology into agriculture, as well as an old friend of mine. I'm going to bring him up now, Mike Bowman. Mike has been, he's a fifth-generation agriculturalist from eastern Colorado, from Ray, although I understand he's in California right now. How you doing, Mike?
Good afternoon, Kat. Doing great.
Great. Yeah, so Mike and I been involved with water issues for a long time, and he's really been doing a lot of great work to look at ways to make it easier for farmers and ranchers and others to integrate new technologies, to look at some of the institutional barriers. Done a lot of work on the Hill. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now?
Well, Kat, I'm presently the chairman of the National Hemp Association, the Industrial Hemp Association. We passed in Colorado a law in 2012, which not only it legalized the adult version of cannabis sativa, but also the industrial hemp version of it as well. And so we've been busy the last 3 years starting to build that industry in Colorado, and I've spent a good share of my time in Washington trying to help at least get some committee hearings and ultimately passage of the Industrial Hemp Farming Act. I did this really in part for several reasons. I tend to think in a systems approach because I've spent a good share of my adult life with Alan Savory in Africa on land management, and so I think in systems. And we can't just, in this particular case, it's kind of appropriate application of water and fertilizer, it's proper rotations. And in this particular case, it's about the plant. The industrial hemp plant is something we've co-evolved with over 12,000 years. It has only been in the last 80 years that it's been prohibited. But it is an amazing plant that uses a fraction of the water that most of our commodity, and particularly the subsidized commodities, use today. And it uses, generally speaking, almost no pesticides or herbicides. So when I look at the system, and you think about water, the water cycle is also the carbon cycle, ergo the environmental cycle, and so right now my focus really right now is on the plant and how are we going to transition some of these incredibly thirsty crops we have, whether they be thirsty for both water and inputs such as pesticides and herbicides, into a crop that doesn't need that, so we can start reversing these disturbing trends, I think, in the environment.
Yeah, we last time I saw you were on the Hill for the Hemp on the Hill Expo. In fact, we have a video up on our channel of an interview we did with you, as well as a number of the other folks who were at that expo using hemp all over the country. Although you've also done a lot of work with looking at alternative energy and using agricultural lands for alternative energy, and just more generally, just that whole concept of the rural community and the economic need to look holistically at, how do farmers make a living? How do farmers stay tied to the land? What are the benefits, the habitat benefits associated with keeping farmers on the land, and some of the wildlife organizations that are working to make sure that farmers can, in fact, that it continues to be economically viable to have farmers stay on the land, that it isn't a matter of separating out, looking at the water side or the energy side or the fertilizer side, but what is the overall benefit of having farms on the land.
You bet. Ecosystem services is what the USDA kind of dubs this whole notion. The politics in the rural parts of the country as a whole have generally been slow to the table at coming to these discussions. But by necessity now we're having to, as we're facing these just resource challenges, whether it be water, whether it be what we're doing to the watersheds with what we choose to do in our fertilization practices, what we do with herbicides and pesticides. We're decimating the monarch butterfly population with mostly Roundup or glyphosate related herbicides, and so now we see again we're having farmers coming back and having to plant milkweed, in effect to try to salvage the monarch butterflies for what we've done over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. So we can shine well on both sides of that coin, and shine well in a not so good way when things aren't done right, and in a very good way when we talk about water and our ability to generate wind and solar resources for the grid and water, improving water quality and actually ultimately I think being a carbon sink for the atmospheric CO2 when with healthy soils brings about an increasing absorption of those atmospheric CO2 into the soil and into carbon. So we have a lot of opportunities, all tied to water and the sunlight and the sunlight. And
the quantity side and the quality side, and really I think that helps sort of give a little context when there are so many new technologies that are being developed, and I'm going to turn over to Harvey Kaye and Emily Felton for their introductions now. But as folks who come up with new technologies, this would be great for agriculture. To really think in terms of the systems as well as the political and cultural, and legal, social systems surrounding rural communities and the agencies that get involved with those communities. So. I want to get started first with Harvey Kaye. Harvey, it was great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Brian, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you and your audience. And actually, Mike had just made a number of comments that are very relevant to everything that we're interested in and that we're talking about. And that basically is that for the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, agriculture has been around trying to feed the human species as we multiply and grow. And then in the 1920s, you then had a Dr. Hoover who invented the ability to bring nitrogen from the atmosphere and apply it actually to agriculture, which literally changed how agriculture was practiced and gave us the ability to increase yields as population grew. What has happened, though, is over the last 50 years, agriculture has been practiced more or less the same way. And as Mike pointed out, an enormous amount of pesticides and fertilizers and fungicides and bactericides have been basically what we've used to try to maintain yield. But the reality of that is that it's literally destroyed the microbiome of the soil, it's destroyed the nutrient value of our agricultural crops and therefore increasing disease and so on. And of course the big problem is how you're going to feed 9 billion people in the next 50 years. Water and how we handle water and what we do with water is an integral part of a potential solution for that. And literally, the need to increase the yield by 50% over the same amount of acreage over the next several years creates major problems. But the only answer that there is, short of destroying all the aquifers and all the bodies of water, rivers, streams, and the like, with all the major runoffs and so on, is to utilize new technology, as you and he have pointed out, to deal with this issue. And we have been lucky enough to be able to be involved with NASA and to derive new technology that was developed for 6 NASA-enabled flights to the International Space Station, the purpose of which is literally the Martian. How are you going to feed and survive space travel to Mars when you can't carry cans of tuna fish or Mars bars with you? And so the answer is that you've got to be able to develop highly nutritive food that can sustain the rigors of space travel, radiation, and the like, and be able to grow in somewhat of a hostile environment. And so our scientist, John Wayne Kennedy, actually, over a 3 or 4 year period of time, developed a technology, which we now call BAM, which stands for bioavailable minerals, which basically uses the actual metabolic pathways of a plant, which are exactly or very similar to those of a human being. And either by soaking the seed or spritzing it, as they say, into the hole when they plant the seed, or foliar application, we get the ability to systemically go through the plant, being able to then get to the cellular level. And it's a combination, a very special patented combination of zinc and copper in a very precise formulation. And because of the positive charge and the negative charge of the plant and BAM, it goes through the cellular membrane into the cell itself and delivers these nutrient values to the plant. And so what we've done, and I can summarize very quickly for you, what we've done is to be able to create a plant that has a greatly enhanced immune system, that has a far more robust root system, that increases the capillary action, the photosynthesis, the chlorophyll utilization, and in effect, you've created a plant that is more robust, more nutritious, grows quicker, and is more able to deal with stress-related problems, which is weather change, which is drought, which is a lack of water, as Mike has pointed out. And so the ability to utilize future technology to deal with a 3,000-year-old adventure of feeding the planet is a unique opportunity for us. We do work very closely with USDA. We do work very closely with state enterprise and sustainable agriculture opportunities. And our mission is to preserve the water systems by lessening the amount of fertilizers, NPKs, bactericides, fungicides that are needed to maintain the yield and to fight off all these stresses of the weather change and lack of water, etc. And so as a basic introduction, I now would like to turn it over to you and Emily, and I'm sure we'll be answering questions a little bit later.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So again, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and I'll try to keep refreshing over here. Go ahead and put those up on the screen, and we'll keep an eye out for those later. But yeah, so let me just ask you, how did you all get started working with NASA on bringing these technologies and commercializing them?
Hoping you would ask that question. Yeah. Okay, but the answer is firstly, I guess I should tell you the name of our company, which is Zero Gravity Solutions.
Zero Gravity Solutions. Got it.
Zero Gravity Solutions.
Got it.
How we actually got started with NASA is our scientific inventor, John Wayne Kennedy, who spent 25 years at the USDA in Beltsville, and was responsible then for the next 20 years at the EPA for actually writing the regulations, basically understood that this was a coming problem, that you just couldn't keep on destroying the planet and the soils to maintain yield. And so he went to NASA, and he said to them, I have a theory. And the theory was that genes and cells express differently in a zero-gravity environment than they do here on Earth. And they gave him a Space Act agreement, which gives you the ability to utilize the resources of NASA, the access to the space station, information, their laboratories, their scientific people, etc. And we actually flew 6 enabled missions to the space station by NASA, and we actually brought up stem cells, both plant and human, mammalian, and we did those experiments, which resulted in a rich trove of intellectual property that Zero Gravity Solutions, a public company, now owns. And so, in the beginning, okay, it was to utilize that intellectual property and the ability to accelerate the directed selection of the stem cells toward the traits that you wanted to have, to actually come up with patented stem cells that you could then market to the agricultural interests of the world. However, 8 or 9 months into the project, they came to me one day and they said, "We have a product." "You have a product? What kind of product do you have?" Well, we were asked to come up with some way to feed astronauts when they go to Mars, and we have this thing called DAN. And we recognized that, well, what would happen if we applied that to agriculture here on Earth? And we actually did that initially. And we worked with UC Davis, and we worked with University of Florida Trek, and we worked with many of the academic and other organizations. And lo and behold, we discovered that it had the same effect that we just talked about. And then we said, well, what would happen if we used 25% less fertilizers, pesticides, NPK, etc.? And we did that. And we found that we were able to continue to increase yield and have all these positive nutrient effects that we talked about. And then we said, well, what would then happen if we used it in different crops? And over the last 2 years, or 2.5 years, we've actually did validation of data trials, okay, with the farming community in California, in Florida, in Chile, in various parts of the world, who were able to validate these things. We did it. We found a tremendous increase in biomass. We've actually done work in Virginia and North Carolina with tobacco growers who are now repurposing tobacco in order to use it as a biofuel instead of corn, which is rough. And lo and behold, we found that we were able to increase yield. We were able to increase the bricks or sugar content, which made it a more valuable fuel, etc. And so now we've done probably 13 or 15 different crops, from tomatoes to Iowa corn. And we've talked to Emily about Iowa corn because we know she's from Iowa, Emily from Iowa. And we've now done 2 seasons of that. In addition, we've done the same thing with wine grapes in Napa Valley, in Sonoma Valley. And we found that given the drought conditions, okay, we were able to take 90-year-old vines and legacy vines, and we rejuvenated them. And they have now increased the amount of yield by 50% using less water and increasing the value and quality of the wine grapes.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like lots of great research and demonstrations of the technology, that it's been applied in a lot of different areas or tested in a lot of different ways. So I'm wondering, Mike, what do you think? When it comes to more mass scale getting this out there. I mean, you and I have talked about some new technologies that when folks try to apply them, everything from how the crop insurance is written to, social and what's your response? What's sort of your reaction when you hear something like this? Because I know that you hear from a lot of folks that have, the next great idea for what to do in the farms.
Well, these are those. Thank you for that presentation, Harvey. And that these are all really exciting things. I think that we suffer, and by we I mean kind of the broader we in agriculture, are suffering from some political maladies right now. We have one is we can now crawl back safely inside a bubble, and by we I mean the majority of farms who are growing things at mass scale and in mostly traditional ways. Because we've just passed the last farm bill again, and and in theory, another 5 years will go by, and it'll just be more of the same. But then inside that, you have all the innovators that are being forced. Generally, I'd say forced to deal with this because of their own personal circumstance. In our case, in the Great Plains, we're seeing the Ogallala Aquifer, being mined to extinction, and we know that if we don't do something different, that our days are numbered, and we have an entire, an economy from South Dakota to the Panhandle of Texas that is dependent upon that water. And so part of this needs to be politics, but as I alluded to earlier, I tend to look at everything through generally through the co-lens of sustainability and public policy. And it takes good, strong leadership who won't lie to to their constituents, which is rare right now, because I'd say we're in a mass state of denial, really, where we're at. At least I'd say the majority of us are, not myself, but there's a denial that climate change is happening. There's the denial that
anything. I think one comment, and then I sort of feel badly because I think we need to get Emily in here.
Yeah, I was about to bring her on also on the groundwater side, but go ahead.
On to what Mike said because I think it's very significant.
Yeah.
The agriculture industry is a not early adopter. You can have studies until you're blue, but at the end of the day, it's show me on my farm on these 50 acres, that it really works here, number one. And so our path to doing exactly what Mike said is that we are actually working with the states. The example would be in Florida, our home base. Okay, we're working very closely with Space Florida. Okay, that is the group that runs Kennedy's. Okay, we are now working very closely with the, and so we are developing a center for excellence, agricultural excellence, in conjunction with various governmental organizations to be able to utilize our technologies and other related technologies in the world of precision agriculture in order to deal with the problems of sustainable agriculture in all these states. Because places like Iowa and Colorado and California and Florida and Texas, it's a big job creator. And like in the state of Florida, we lost 25% of our citrus crop last year to citrus greening. We have to find answers. Every major monoclonal crop in the world is under threat of disease or major problems. And so our ability to collaborate with the state, with the departments of agriculture, with the governor's offices, with the ability to work with sustainable agriculture and therefore job creation is a major means to be able to accomplish the reluctance of trying something new.
Yeah, but yeah. And I, as I've seen it, and we just had the Environmental Film Fest here in DC. A lot of the films were focusing on case studies and stories of innovations in agriculture, and they're and from the crowd that Mike and I tend to run in, that we see just there is a lot of willingness and interest and just jumping in there, and of farmers who are becoming innovative when they can. And some just often it's by necessity. It's illnesses associated with pesticides. It's economic incentives. It's illnesses affecting their plants, and so there is that how to ensure that there is an opportunity to get those on the ground for those farmers that do want to be more innovative, with recognizing that they're in this whole net of government programs and financial programs and things like that it needs to be somehow integrated within both the cultural constraints and the institutional constraints to be able to support innovations on agricultural land, in recognizing, as you said, exactly the kind of mechanisms going through states, going through centers of excellence, going through federal programs. I think we're seeing more and more of that. And let me go ahead and grab Emily now, just because we haven't.
If I could just interject on the topic.
Please go ahead.
One thing that I would really like to say is the Des Moines Register over the past 12 or 18 months has been running a lot of editorials talking about the importance of these natural grasses and hemp and the role that they can play in saving and protecting the water supply from a lot of these runoffs. And it's very reflective of what both Mike and Harvey have said, in that it's all about speed and timing, and people are slow to the movement because something that I've seen in the last 12 months that's been all over the news that I've heard Harvey talk about is the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit. And something that I said living in Iowa in the fall is any common sense person would be stepping in there and saying, hey guys, let's come to a joint agreement where we're going to start doing things that are proactively protecting the water supply, but then think about the economic effects that they can have on our community. Because if we look further back into Iowa history in the late 80s, the Iowa legislature said that they were going to come up with some sort of governing body that would go around to every farm in Iowa and ensure that every 3 or 5 years the crops were getting rotated. And growing up in Iowa, we've got a Century farm that we rent off to another guy that's been taking care of it for years. I can't honestly say that I've seen anything other than corn on our property, or anything other than corn on the properties across from us, or anything on virtually any of these properties other than corn and soybeans. And so when we stop and we think about what we're doing, it's very much a slow response. Unless people are being forced, now we're talking about generation farmers who have the tractors, who have all of the materials, and they're very comfortable with what they have. But it's giving us the voice and the opportunity to kind of to get some change to happen, and that's where I can kind of segue into what I'm doing. I grew up in rural eastern Iowa. My dad's always been involved in the water systems in Dubuque and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He was very much interested in always kind of telling us, we tested this and we found this at the dam today, and this, that, and the third, and I didn't know at a young age where it was going, but I went off to college. I went off to Stony Brook. I ended up getting involved in sociology with my undergraduate degree, and now I'm doing higher education administration, because I understand that any technology that we introduce will not be enough if we're unable to make the connections to the government realm, to the commercialization opportunities, to make things happen. So last fall I got involved with a religious leader from West Africa, and we started talking about the real need to find safe water access. And here in the States, because of our Industrial Revolution train that we all hopped on 100 years ago, our technologies really don't fit what they have. They don't have a lot of the energy sources that we have. So over the last 6 months, I've been working with Gail Pumps to develop a wind-driven desalinization unit to help alleviate the pressures of using what poor water infrastructure they have set up that's causing these problems like malaria, cholera, Ebola. Just using a common sense solution that brings together the community to become vested into it. So we're using higher education as the connector, as the vehicle to bring community investment into the project, because it's like we're saying here in the States, with a lot of these communities in West Africa, they've been developing over the last few decades, but if you give them something new and it breaks down, if they lived fine without it, they'll wave and say, oh, it's fine, that's, whatever. So it's finding a simple solution that we know will be able to make a long-lasting impact. Because a lot of these diseases that we're talking about, they exist there because they don't have the sanitation systems that we have in the States. They don't have anything that's really looking out for them, and no one's been able to find a comprehensive solution to bring that together. So I'm really glad that we could be on this webcast today so that the four of us could open up and talk, because there's so much here that we can be talking about, and the role that each one of us can play if we were able to bring the right leadership, federal leadership partners and state leadership partners to the table and share these ideas with them. Because, we talk about the great impacts that things like Harvey's project can have on Iowa, but the scariest part that we're not admitting here is that Iowa is importing 80% of its crops. It's what can we do to, yeah, we can keep creating ethanol in Iowa, but what else can we do to utilize these other crops that we've kind of let fall by the wayside because they can't thrive in Iowa anymore? So I'm really excited to be on the call. I'm really excited to be able to share what I'm doing with Action Energy. You know, we picked the name Action Energy because we're about actually doing things. You know, as a young person, I have the drive, and I don't want to waste my time, you know, being a part of the institution. If I have a simple solution that really can make a big impact, I want to do all that I can to make that known to the rest of the world, to bring that to people who deserve it.
Yep.
I had Emily, when we look at the
Oh, everybody wants to jump in now. You know, and I want to actually throw this back to Mike also, because yeah, I mean, Emily raised a number of very good points. One of the things I see, you know, first of all, the reluctance to take on the innovation. You know, I really do wonder sometimes how much is reluctance versus constraints, other constraints, you know, versus just being, you know, dumb conservative, you know, don't want to try anything new kind of stuff. But we do see a lot of these new technologies being applied overseas first, or you know, particularly focusing on overseas applications. And Mike, you worked with the folks at Savory Institute overseas. Partly, I guess, you know, I guess part of it is just seeing such a great need over there in, you know, in certain countries, but also, you know, how much of it is it just easier to try some new technology in other countries?
Well, in the Savory model was, you know, was born out of necessity. Again, they're in the Eastern Kalahari Sands, where there's been a kind of vast certification. So this is about how you heal land with holistic management of animals. So that's, yeah, but their necessities often aren't any different than ours. If I go back to what Emily was just talking about, if you look at that necessity through a water quality issue, and I believe Governor Branstad in Iowa, not just a couple of months ago, was proposing, you know, taking billions of dollars out of the state's education program to deal with water quality issues in the runoff, and so that's got to take you back. You know, it's like, I would say that every scenario, if we don't go to the root of that, if you don't ever go to the root of the problem, you're not going to fix it. So part of it is as Harvey's talking about, we've got to get better with our fertilizers and our mix of micronutrients and the timing. But also, it is literally, you know, we're pretending that we're producing all this cheap food while we're poisoning our waterways, and we're causing a, you know, multi-billion-dollar disaster in another sector, and pretending that our real costs, and that we don't have to cover that. Right. And so, I mean, we've got to integrate all of this into a single model, because we can't. It's the same as coal-fired power. There's 18 cents per kilowatt hour in externalized health costs per kilowatt hour on a coal plant. But for decades, we've let the utility industry say that they're the cheapest source of energy, because they don't have to recognize any of the costs of their negative externalities. And so agriculture doesn't get to live in a vacuum on that either. We have got to address the system, and that's, you know, clearly that's one of them.
Yeah.
May I add a couple little comments to that?
Yes, please, Harvey. Yeah.
Okay, so the comments are, Emily hit this point, and so did Mike. Okay, what is going to force adaptation and perhaps changes in, you know, adopting new technologies is really the regulatory environment. Because Emily mentioned the Des Moines lawsuit, and that's Des Moines water treatment facilities are proposing, or have in fact sued, the farmers upstream on the Kangaroo River because of the runoff. And it's kind of messing up their water treatment facility, and they're really not prepared, you know, to handle the massive amounts of phosphates, nitrates, and all the rest. Same thing in California, except that what California is now doing is they are now levying a tax on the farmers and evaluating the amount of what they're applying, and then attacking a tax to it for the runoffs. Okay, Florida just passed a new rule. It's called the Farm Bill. And the purpose of the Farm Bill is specifically to protect the state's aquifers and the bodies of water. The aquifer that Mike referred to is the major aquifer in the United States, and that was part of the problem. Okay, the Athabasca River, Athabasca problems with the dirty, heavy oil coming out of the oil shales.
Up in Alberta, right?
So they've actually passed these regulations, and now they're going to enforce them at the county level. And each of the counties are writing regulations for how are you going to enforce the fact that you got to change your ag practices and prevent some of this runoff. And so I think it's a combination of the availability of new technology, which wasn't around for quite a while, okay, and the enforcement now aspect of it, and a recognition of the understanding that you just can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
I think one thing that that really does need to be said is I think there's a big problem with how our government operates, having a House and a Senate where they just vote. There's no opportunity for discussion on these types of things, so really there isn't as much opportunity, I feel like, given for learning in that environment. For example, this past week, Harvey and I were in D.C. at a water conference, and someone who had been in some type of leadership role in politics made the comment that their cotton farmers were upset about the drought. And I wanted to raise my hand and just say, you know, cotton is one of the most dangerous when we talk about the ecosystem of the soil and what it does. We're talking about cotton here. You know, and this is a liberal leader. You know, how do we educate those people to talk about how, you know, if we want to have a thriving ecosystem, we have to bring back into it the diversity that used to exist there. You know, and without a government that allows for, you know, functional discussion and, you know, open discussion like a lot of the parliament systems have, we're stuck in this gridlock of just we vote either for the farm bill or against it. You know, there really isn't as much, you know, meeting in the middle as there should be.
Well, of course, there is the you know, the committees, the subcommittees, hearings, field hearings right now. It's just after Easter. The members are out in their districts, and there's some hearings going on. One of the things that we at Water Citizen Media Foundation have been working on is this Water in Congress on Air, of actually being able to get those members of Congress who are working on some of these issues to be able to have more of an open dialogue on what they're working on, get some feedback that is, you know, it's challenging for them to be able to get. Not everyone can afford to go to Washington, D.C. To be able to get those different perspectives.
And not everyone's an agriculturalist either.
Sorry?
Not everyone's an agriculturalist either.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and the fact that you know, there's so many different water programs, there is no one water committee, which is probably a good thing in a way, because you know, you get more members involved with water issues. But you know, and then the fact that USDA is such a major role in water providers in rural areas, you know, providing great support for, you know, smaller rural communities, as well as recognizing, you know, we have coming up Water Week on Capitol Hill in the middle of April. The major water, you know, several of the major water associations, wastewater associations, water reuse, will be here in D.C., and they'll be doing lots of meetings with folks on the Hill, and there have been an increasing number of partnership efforts between agricultural communities and in the cities, and I think, you know, there's sort of this tendency to separate cities versus farms when so many of the major cities in this country are in areas where they are surrounded by farmland, and where the major source of, you know, so much of the economy of those cities is dependent on the health of the economies of the surrounding farmland.
But Kate,
yes.
You've come right to the point, okay? And I understand exactly what you and Emily and Mike have said, but think of it this way. It's going to happen first, in my humble opinion, at the state level. And the reason for that is because it relates to jobs, and it relates to gross state product. And if you have major agricultural areas where, you know, they lose jobs and they harm their water environment, and, you know, and that affects their tax base and affects their budgets and affects all these other things, you're going to start, in my opinion, to see regulation emanating from the states first. And it's going to be a collaboration between departments of agriculture, who understand the issues, as Mike has pointed out, and the state governments who understand other issues, such as loss of tax base, such as loss of budget ability. And then if you can bring into it, you know, the whole grant program, whether they're federal grants, whether they're state grants, whatever they are, and you can now start to, you know, get a collaboration between states and USDA and state farm bureaus and grants both at the state and federal level. I think you got a shot to accelerate, you know, what we're all trying to accomplish. That's my thought.
I think a reflection of that would be when we talk about the popularity that's been growing behind the solar panels, with a lot of the state partnerships to allow for the, you know, getting it cash incentives back and tax credits and things. If we're able to almost reflect that in some type of way, take that idea of, you know, if you're able to switch over to this technology, you know, if there's some type of incentive, people are willing to kind of push forward. I think that's something that's really helped for people who weren't ready to take on the challenge of, oh, I'm bringing in solar cells, you know, by being able to say to them, hey, if you're willing to make this change, you know, we can make some sort of agreement because you're doing a lot of good long term. You know, that would be some type of incentive, but it's really hard to bring them something new that they're not used to when we talk about Monsanto just being a household name.
You know, whoops, we're getting a bit of an echo there. My, you know, my home state of New Jersey is actually one of the Garden State is one of the, I think it's still the biggest, the #1 state in the country for agricultural use of solar. Mike, is that right? I think we talked about that before. There's the agricultural lands in New Jersey use a lot of solar, and there's a lot of opportunities. You know, some of what we talked about has been about sort of this large-scale industrial, you know, throughout the agricultural industry of you know, changing crop types and changing, you know, the direction of the industry. But Emily, you know, we didn't really talk very much about specifically what your technology does, and that is at a highly localized, it's at individual well scale of what farmers can do with wells on their property and actually doing desal, removing the salt from getting water from saline aquifers, and there's so many places where freshwater aquifers are
hard to come by,
but there are other alternatives.
Right.
For saline aquifer in this country.
Right, right. Something my partner and I were talking about when we talk about along the coastline, Caribbean islands, a lot of, I just met with a partner in Ireland who is from the Emirates, and we were speaking about the World and the Universe Islands project. And these are islands that they already know 30 years from now are going to flood out and not exist anymore because of the levels the water will rise. But because of their huge checkbooks, they're able to kind of do whatever. If you kind of follow the story, a lot of times these projects get stalled because of financing. But when we talk about the desal unit that my project's working on, it is like you said, it's a localized thing. In one day, we're able to produce 10,000 gallons of water, which depending on where you live can service anywhere from 200 to 2,000 people, and it really has the opportunity with the net zero energy emissions to make a big impact. And when we talk about the common sense solutions, at the same conference that you and Harvey and I were both at, there was another woman who was talking about some large-scale desal projects, and we're talking the same price line, but doing a fifth of the amount of gallons of water and doing it on electrical energy. You know, and when you think about these places that are remote areas that are using these wells, they need electrical energy. Isn't as easy to come by as we really make it out to be, and by switching over to the desal, it makes for a lot safer water quality, especially when we're talking about the Zika virus that's coming out of the south. A lot of these things are coming out of the freshwater ecosystems because the sitting stagnant water allows for these bacteria to grow. But by taking advantage of the salt water, it's a lot safer for our people, and it's a lot more reliable as far as, you know, we're not ever going to be dipping out of an aquifer, you know, in a freshwater aquifer in the Midwest. You know, it's just utilizing the things that we have to make progress happen. And like we've all said, people always have great ideas, but sometimes they really miss the ball and they foul it off. You know, they get a hit, but it's down the left field line. You know, it's just a single. We really can do more than this. You know, with our education system here in the States, and it's really about putting in the work it takes to find the simple solution that people need. You know, because we found time and time again when we overcomplicate things, that's when we cause long-term problems. That's when, you know, it comes back to bite us, and it's really hard to watch as we have the opportunity to step in and say, hey, these are some alternatives, and it's the pushback. It's hard sometimes to get in contact with those government players to make the big projects work.
You know, there's also the economic aspect of it. And
right.
may I just give you a little quick example? All of the work that we have done, Mike, you'll find this interesting. We've gotten all these increases in yields and all these other good benefits that I talked about, and we've cut back the NPKs, the fertilizers, and all the farming chemicals by 25%. It means that, and then the fertilizer company might say, oh my God, I'm losing 25% of my revenue. However, if you substitute that 25% with BAM, the economic value proposition to the farmer and to the large distributors, and that's another way to introduce a new product, you know, through the large distributors. We all know who the names are, and we're talking to all of them. That is that instead of selling a commodity product where you're getting a 3 or 4% return, if you could sell a product that becomes a specialty product, and you work on a 30% markup, but the cost to the farmer and the economic value proposition works out the same because he has better yield, he has less runoff, he has all those other benefits that we talked about, then inevitably the combination of regulatory pressure and the economic pressure and all of the other aspects of it will, in essence, force this innovation to occur. And you got to just stay at it. You got to, like Emily said, you got to keep hitting it day after day, time after time, because the industry are slow adopters.
Well, so Mike, I mean, you know, the average farmer, I mean, farmers are the ultimate entrepreneurs. They have to just look at all these, you know, they have to look at the way they're doing their business now and hopefully keep things going and keep afloat, and looking at these different alternatives. I mean, how many trade shows could they go to, or online, you know, TV specials can they look at to try to figure out, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna change everything on my farm. But how does that happen? How do they, you know?
But I'll tell you, because I don't want to, you know, hog the show, but because you talk to, and Mike and Emily, you will confirm this, they see more new products every day. Okay, they'll show you, I got a warehouse or I got a shed full of new products and make all these wonderful claims. And the problem is that, you know, they become immune to, you know, quote, the snake oil. And so what you got to do is you got to show them, prove it to them, and do it the first time. In the wine industry, the first time we applied it at the end of the first season, everybody said, wow, that's phenomenal. And I said, great, how about a purchase order? And they said, well, do it again, because it may have been a fluke the first time. And we did it again. And now we've broken through that cycle. And I'm sure that Mike and Emily, who are very close to the farming community, will confirm that mindset. What do you guys say?
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the other two, you can put a lot of the farm community in two camps, because increasingly those that are growing crops on the bulk of the acreage in the United States, a small number of very large farms are in a system where the crops and the herbicides and even the end use of the soybean or the corn really is predetermined by the genetics of that corn that is controlled by the company that also controls the applications of herbicide and pesticide. So there, and in some cases, and that's a big problem, because that's all ingrained into the Farm Bill and the federal crop insurance and all the safety nets that they have It's a very, very difficult system to transition out of or escape, whatever your position point of view might be. But to Harvey's point, having these, having demonstrations, having something that someone can just go up and look at and see is probably as important as anything. And that's as true whether it's new crops or whether it's new technology. I can remember 30 years ago, I was the first one to grow sunflowers, in our area, and nobody wanted to. It was a weed, for heaven's sakes. It's as if somehow it wouldn't grow or somehow this wouldn't work. And we just planted it and treated it just like anything else, and had a great crop. And then pretty soon, sunflowers were widely adopted. But without those farmers being able to see it, they weren't going to do it.
Right.
I think
this is such a wild story. The very, very first crop that we put BAM on in one of our directors' farms, ranches, I guess, in Texas, were sunflowers. And I have pictures, which I will share. The one that they bought a pack of sunflower seeds from Walmart. They planted 1, 2, 3. One they watered one time. One they watered 2 or 3 times. And the BAM ones they planted and never watered. The first one was up to your knee. The second one was up to your hip. And then the third sunflower plant that we did with BAM was 8.5 feet tall.
Wow.
And the flower itself was the size of a large pizza. And we got 1.5 quarts of seeds as opposed to a pint or so. And we said, my God, we've just invented Jack and the Beanstalk. This is like the greatest thing. We were so excited. And
I have to show you this, just only because it happens to be here. This is what I looked like 30 years ago when I grew the first sunflower crop in Colorado, and that head is indeed the size of a pizza.
Yours are the sunflowers.
That was 30 years ago.
I just had to say that. By the way, I want to say that we are not a GMO product. I never said that, but it's important.
Yeah.
We're not GMO. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and that is important to point out. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Emily, you had a response as well, I think.
I was just going to say, and Harvey just pointing that out echoed it all. In any project, in any new technology, if we want to succeed, something that I've been focusing in on is the connection with researchers in the higher education field. And you'll see with Harvey's success with NASA, it really takes, to make any of these things happen, it takes bringing in those leadership voices to make this the medium for student research and student experience to latch on. We talk about Harvey's projects. If we really start thinking about it, in Iowa, every ag program is run by the state, every FFA program, and so if we were able to reach out to them and say, hey, in your greenhouses this next year, would you be willing to do, if X amount of schools could do a half and half, use BAM, don't use BAM, it allows for the research to be even more meaty, and allowed to be accepted. And something I wanted to say way earlier about when we were talking about milkweed was that my family lives in a rural community of about 3,000 in eastern Iowa, and about a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, we're about a block from the edge of town. And the natural grasses, natural weeds, about 15 years ago, a milkweed blew into our yard and started to grow. And my dad looked it up, and he said, "Oh, this is going to bring the monarchs around." So he let that grow that one year, and we picked up 3, 4, 5 monarchs that made it their home, that did the whole, grow and metamorphosize and fly away. The next year, he didn't control it because he realized, oh, this is going to make. He already feeds the birds, feeds the squirrels. He likes being that guy, So he let it grow that next year. And by the end of in the middle of the summer, he had gotten a complaint from the city because the neighbors were complaining that he had weeds growing on our yard in the middle of town. And, the milkweeds were growing, 3, 4, 5 feet tall. So he got online and he worked with, I'm not sure if it was the natural, the wildlife conservationists across the state or the nation or whatever, but he's gotten our property recognized as a monarch butterfly conservation area, because now every year, given summer day, you can find 24 monarchs flying around in the middle of town. But you know, it's a great example of where people saw weeds, you know, and they didn't realize what they really were cutting out of the picture by not allowing these kinds of things to naturally grow.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to all of these issues, there's so much. Like, everybody's from Missouri. You know, it is show me, and one of the things we're trying to do with Water Citizen Media Foundation is provide people with a means of showing and telling those stories, and you know, people can actually take their phones out to the field and show people what's going on, and either live stream it or do it as a recording, and often when we do hangouts, we'll try to do more sharing or show bits of videos and things like that, but do more sharing of what you see, and have people ask questions and be able to demonstrate what's going on and how things are working out in the field. Because hearing about it is one thing, certainly reading papers and lots of reports and all the stacks of documents that, you know, Congress and the agencies, they can't digest all that. But to be able to show each other and have conversations around these, you know, hopefully that is someplace that we can begin to go with some of the things that we're doing with Water Citizen, because it has to be more than just doing the research, writing the papers, and maybe showing up at a conference. So,
you know, there's one other thing that we should have mentioned a little bit earlier as well, and that you all will agree, and that is that part of this adoption of change has to come, because Emily just reminded me of this, has to come from the extension agent programs, the co-op programs. Okay, I had the opportunity to meet with the head of NEFA when I was in Washington. And
define NEFA for our audience.
Yes, it's the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and it's part of the USDA. They manage a $1.6 billion budget. The director, Sonny Warma-Shama, was extremely gracious. And his comment to me was that there is a lost generation. And the lost generation is that from the 80s to the early 2000s, people that were being educated in agriculture were basically focused on more chemicals, more pesticides, more fertilizers, more this, more that. And he says, and what's been missing, and I know you guys are going to agree with this, is understanding the physiology of what makes plants grow, of what actually is happening internally. We currently have recently signed a Space Act agreement with NASA Ames. They're using some of their top scientists, folks that are associated with the USDA out there and NASA Ames, and they are studying the actual, at the molecular and atomic level, why the results that we are getting, we're actually getting. And so, you know, it's an ongoing understanding, and he was very excited about that because he feels that now, you know, the circle is coming the other way. That it's not just about throw more stuff on, but it's understanding what plants need to grow and thrive. And I think that working through the farm bureaus and the co-ops and the extension agents and the universities is a significant aspect of it.
Great, great. Well, that's a good point to wrap with, and you know, hear some final words from Emily and Mike, and you know, where can we continue this conversation? I know we're wrapping up about an hour right now. I can see from our viewers we've had people coming on all hour. What are your final thoughts, Mike and Emily?
Go ahead, Emily. I'll let you go first.
All right. My final thoughts. It's like Harvey and I are kind of in the same boat. You know, kind of up and coming projects. My final thoughts are really. If we want to see anything change, it's going to have to be more than an intersection of science and humanities, of bringing two partners together. This is going to have to be bringing together technology, humanities, education, research, all of the players to keep pushing this movement forward, to push the discussion forward, to ensure that the discussions that we're having are actually 21st century discussions and aren't limited based on the technologies we know of the past. You know, I'm really hoping that the projects I'm working on with Gail and Action Energy, that we're able to bring those to the developing world, you know, because we talk about, you know, how we move forward as one people, and if we're unable to bring to them the common sense solution that we brought up here in the States 20 or 30 years ago, really, what are we doing? You know, so it's just bringing the right parties to the table who believe in what we're talking about on my end, and I'm really hoping that anyone who's seeing this cast is really inspired to become a part of the conversation and to start bringing to life these ideas in the local community arena, in the political state level arena, and even at the larger level with some of the larger organizations. But really just to get the conversation going and keep it going, because honestly, if we don't do something, my generation, there's no guarantee I'm going to see Harvey's age, you know?
Absolutely. Mike?
Well, this has been a great conversation. I think this is a phrase that came out somewhat long ago, but is pertinent today. You know, think globally, act locally. This is, you know, what we do, and to Harvey's point on the local extension agent, the role of land grant universities and USDA and NEFA in this is could not possibly be more critical. But that's why elections matter. That's why leaders matter. That's why informed leaders matter on this, and in particular leaders that understand a holistic concept of managing these systems. And you know, for a lost generation, we have. There was someone that once just said not long ago. You know, we need more generalists and less special. We need everybody, right? But we still need to have everybody who can connect all of those dots and then deliver that in a sane and sensible public policy. So I couldn't be more excited really about our future. I think we can do anything we want to do or that we're led to do through incentives and disincentives from the political realm, and we're going to do and likewise to our natural resource realm. And we are going to be forced to change whether we want to or not. Do we want to be leaders? Do we want to do well and do better by doing well? And I think we can do it. And I'm generally very optimistic about the future with that cautious optimism because we have it's a human capacity issue we have right now. I think not a technology capacity in particular.
Can I say something very short?
Sure, go ahead, Harv.
Okay. The very short is that because I'm the guy with gray hair on the phone, okay, I'm lucky enough to have 3 grandchildren, okay? And if somebody were to say to you that in 50 years, your children and your grandchildren may not have enough to eat, and worse, whatever they're eating is not going to be very nutritious, that would be an appalling thing. And the significance of what we are talking about on this phone call today is nothing short of dealing with the most existential threat to humanity, which is how literally are you going to feed 9.5 billion people with weather change and all these problems that are affecting agriculture. And it's up to all of us, as Emily said, it's up to all of us, as Mike has pointed out, and you, that we have the perseverance, force of will, to let people understand that this is not a make-believe problem, that it's a real problem, and we got to do something about it. And I think about that every day, that we need to feed our children and our grandchildren. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, I'm excited that we were able to have this conversation today. You know, I think there is a place for intelligent conversations that really break down some of the stereotypes that we often see portrayed in mainstream media about farmers and cities and regulators and technologies and you know, these are complex issues and they deserve more than a soundbite. I think we touched on some really important issues here about how do we integrate new technologies, about how do we deal with institutional barriers, cultural barriers, as well as using those institutions and some of the personal characteristics and characters to move some of these technologies forward, to provide some really good case studies and provide opportunities to show people what can be done. We touched on some of the partnership opportunities between cities and agricultural areas, you know, that we're not separate. Same thing with the point that Emily made regarding, you know, partnerships between farmers and environmental organizations. I know Mike and I have worked with a number of those groups that have created these creative partnerships. So I think these are some excellent conversations that we can continue to try to find opportunities to bring some folks together to have these sorts of conversations. If you like what you've seen here on the Water Show on these topics, please do go to watercitizen.com/thewatershow. Type your comments. Let us know what sorts of things that you'd like to hear from. Email me, kat@watercitizen.com. Let me know if you have something that you'd like to add to the conversation. We'll see what we're still working out our editorial calendar of shows that are coming up. There's a lot of great conversations that we can have. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Emily Felton, for coming from Stony Brook, Iowa, by way of Stony Brook, New York, and Harvey Kaye. Thank you so much for your joining us, and Mike Bowman, always great to see you. And I know we'll have lots more conversations to have. So please do support the Water Citizen Media Foundation. We are now a 501c3, a fiscally sponsored program of United Charitable 501c3 public charity. Great to have your support. Great to have you here. Leave your comments down below. Subscribe. Let us know you're here, and join us again next time. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.